For those of you who, like me, are old enough to recall that eventful day in 1968, you probably can also remember just where you were and what you were doing when you heard the news that Dr. King had been assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. Only a week prior, Archbishop Paul J. Hallinan, Atlanta's first archbishop, had died from hepatitis. This local church was already deep in grief when the news of one of our most prominent citizens, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., had been killed was broadcast across the world. 1968 was a very harsh year in many ways, filled as it was with far too much violence and a pervading deep sense of loss. Bobby Kennedy would be killed a few months after Dr. King's assassination in that very same year of 1968. Thousands of young people lost their lives or were wounded on the battlefields of Vietnam in 1968. Political and social unrest seized the streets of many of the cities in the United States of America in 1968. Democrats, Republicans, and third-party candidates all vied for political advantage during those unsettling times of 1968. Today, 50 years later, we unfortunately are still accustomed to living during traumatic times. Today, the plights of our immigrant neighbors should trouble all of our hearts, since so many people who have come to this land of promise in search of opportunity for themselves and their families, and to shelter from the violence in their own native lands, are now facing discrimination and condemnation. Our political scene today is as problematic as it was in 1968. Our elected officials continue to display little ability to work together for the common good. Women have been openly revealing just how often they have been abused and compromised in the workplace over many years. Clearly, 2018 is a complicated year, and it's only just beginning. Now, 50 years since Dr. King was taken from us, we must continue to admire and to emulate his legacy and his witness of faith and truth. Many of the wonderful things that have taken place in our nation and around the world owe much of their existence to this intrepid man of courage. While there are still far too many societal and national problems that we continue to face, there would have been so many more today without his leadership and his example. Unfortunately, we continue to grapple with some of the very same issues that Dr. King faced: racism, injustice, and indifference. And these are never dispensed with such ease as a bullet can silence a man, but never his dreams. Some of us may have thought, or perhaps hoped, that racism was overpowered by the great example and witness of his life, along with the courageous examples of so many other civil rights pioneers. Others were more hesitant to believe that the often hidden and always toxic sin of racism can be so easily overcome. Today, we know that it continues to lurk deep within the very soul of our nation. Some, in fact, believe that it has not diminished at all, and perhaps has grown more resilient as current behavior and rhetoric seem to confirm. Xenophobia, racism's clone, masquerades today as a patriotic response to the presence of immigrants and refugees who are in our midst, as they have been in our midst from the foundation of our nation. Moreover, people in our nation continue to be victimized because of their color, or their first language, or their sexual orientation, or their religious beliefs, like too many people did 50 years ago. 1968 was a very harsh year. We pray that 2018 will not continue to follow that same similar pattern. Prayer must always be our first line of defense. However, prayer alone is insufficient to overcome the societal and moral corruption that seems to have us in its hold. The way of the Beatitudes must cast us today in the same direction as Dr. King followed: the path to peace and the lasting change that Jesus himself first established. It is to that path that calls all of us to become peacemakers, to be humble and pure of heart, and to continue to strive to be merciful, traits that Dr. King clearly exhibited throughout his storied life. In today's ever more hostile climate of offensive rhetoric, punitive public policies, and increasing acts of violence, both too frequent in their mass killings as well as those that take a single individual's life, we all need the mind of Jesus and the example of Dr. King and all of his colleagues to keep us from losing heart. 50 years after the assassination of Dr. King, and considering our world today, we might all be tempted to believe that his life and his death accomplished nothing, since so many of the issues that he addressed a half-century ago seem to defy improvement. That is always, however, the legacy of sin, designed to convince us that all is lost that nothing will improve, that hatred is the final sentence imposed upon all of us. The Beatitudes are Christ's guarantee that God's plan can and will ultimately turn this world on its head. The Beatitudes present an icon of hope that must sustain us all until Christ is all in all. For surely he will overcome, not just with the words of a song, but in due course with a lasting victory of justice. 1968 was a brutal and violent year. May God preserve us in 2018 with a better year, more filled with hope, justice, and peace. Amen.